Ms. Bauer, Mr. Powell. Okay, let's check. So we will find the way how you will see me, but honorable speakers, honorable partners and participants, we highly value your commitment and support for the Riga Conference Future Leaders Forum. This is very special year for all of us. It is full of challenges and opportunities as well. And during those very turbulent times, it is especially important to remember who we are, what are values we want to follow, and where we and what we want to achieve, where we want to go. And Future Leaders Forum is a very important part of the set of events of the Riga Conference. You, our participants, are those future decision makers and those experts who will discuss the most prominent security issues within the Riga Conference debates in a very near future. And today we have just excellent experts here with us this year. And thank you very much for readiness to share your expertise and experience. Participants, please take this great chance to ask the questions you have. Also, here today, we have two great partners, two great representatives of our partners, Ms. Bauer from Konrad Adenauer Foundation and Eric Powell from NATO. Thank you very much for your great support of our Future Leaders Forum. And now I would like to invite to say a couple of words to our partners. Ms. Bauer, please.
By the way, now you are seen as well. We can see you, which is quite good. Dear participants and dear speakers, as well as soon as you are already there, having this Future Leaders Forum at this time, a challenging time, it's not only interesting for you as the next generation, but as well interesting for us to get to know about your positions, attitudes, and ideas. And I have to say, in one sense, it makes a lot of sense to have it online. First of all, it's much more nearer to you to work with this techniques all the way around. First of all, secondly, in that way we can even host more people than in person, because in person we would have some limits on financial issues. So it's much more interesting for you. And thirdly, I think it might be even happen that there are some more persons from far more away than normally in that. Most interesting for me was on Monday, the NATO Future Leaders Forum, which was hosted by the Munich Security Conference. In an internet question, the young leaders had to choose what they see as a main topic for NATO, and by their choice it was, and their choice it was the prioritization. Interesting enough, it was not security in the first place, but taking responsibility for the values and to act value-based. And I think this is one of the main messages we can take already from that Future Leaders Forum to do our work on this behavior. I was really surprised by the result, but it may be that this depended as well on the developments in the US and the discussion around the elections. Although not knowing when finally the president will accept his defeat, we already can see one thing: the importance of institutions. And in this case, we are coming back to NATO. NATO is an institution itself, which has to be there because it guarantees our freedom, our security, and a common view on the world. And we always have to discuss, even inside the NATOs. NATOs are friends, but friends can have differences, but we shouldn't divide, because NATO ensures our security, not only in the Baltic state, but as well all around the world where the NATO is active. And so in this case, in this sense, I wish all of you very interesting discussions, very fruitful discussions, and hoping that's one of the other things what NATO is doing as well. And we have to looking for really well done networking. This is one of the main things as well, which is connected with NATO. So thank you very much, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now I would like to invite Mr. Powell to say some introduction words.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sigita, for this opportunity, and particularly thanks to Nato and to you and your entire team for pulling off another Riga conference and this Future Leaders Forum in these very difficult circumstances, COVID days, and turning it into this virtual event. It's always great to talk to groups of young professionals and students, hopefully NATO's future leaders indeed. And Elizabeth already mentioned our youth summit that we had last Monday. I think this is sort of a new venture from our side. Certainly the Secretary General personally is very committed to engaging with young leaders, particularly now that we are embarking on this important discussion about NATO's future until 2030. And also you saw the installation of a group of young leaders that he has selected from across the NATO alliance to help him and to get maybe somewhat different inputs than you get from the usual think tankers and security experts. And we certainly are adamant to continue in that direction of engaging more with the young generation. As always, we in NATO Public Diplomacy Division, we are happy to co-sponsor the Riga conference. As we all know, it remains one of the best international and high-level conferences in Europe and certainly in the Baltic region. I'm also very happy that this time the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg will be able to give his, I think you called it, the snapshot for the future on Friday morning when the Riga conference really kicks off. And my own boss in my division, very well known in Latvia, Ambassador Baiba Braze, Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy. She's also looking forward to talk about NATO's relevance on Friday afternoon in the panel discussion on NATO. So with that short introduction, once again, congratulations on being able to organize the Riga conference in these difficult circumstances. Again, it's a show of Latvia's resilience and adaptability. And I look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we are going to have very interesting, from my perspective, discussions. And the first one will be regarded to the future of NATO, or the ways how NATO should react to the challenges in the future. And I'm happy that Eric will be also one of the speakers within this panel. And now I would like to invite our moderator to join us here with our speakers on the panel. And later on, we are going to have another panel, which will be regarded to Chinese current challenge to NATO. Tomorrow, we will have a chance to debate on the sustainability of democracy, as well as I really invite you to join the other panels of the Riga conference as such. We will have very interesting warm-up sessions which will discuss current issues of region, like, for example, Belarus, etc. For this reason, I really think that the overall agenda of Future Leaders Forum is really interesting and gives certain picture and gives a chance to discuss the current topical challenges we are facing at the moment. And now I would like to invite Sandis Schraders, who is the member of the board of Latvian Transatlantic Organization, and he will be the one who will moderate the panel. Thank you.
Can you hear me well? This is a little communication test because oh, thank you very much, thumbs up. It means the sound is going through from Riga all the way to Brussels. Thank you very much, Nato, for doing this. This is the 5th consecutive leader forum for the young leaders from Europe and across the Atlantic. This year, I have learned that it brings together more than 80 young leaders from the Euro-Atlantic area, from Europe and also Northern America. It brings together 6 countries from more than 80 states to discuss upcoming challenges for the Euro-Atlantic community, for NATO member states, and also those that are members of the European Union. Very recently and at a growing extent, we are facing similar and growing challenges to the Euro-Atlantic community. And today, it is my pleasure to open this forum for the discussion, which is entitled NATO and Modern Conflicts, Adaptation and Transformation. So this is really something that youngsters should discuss in order to address the future challenges of NATO. This is also something that youngsters and young leaders should discuss to bring up the new ideas, how to cope with the future challenges to the existing leaders presently at NATO or the European security institutions. We have to discuss different kind of challenges that we know that are already classical past challenges, conventional challenges that we are facing today. Because NATO is an alliance, and it has been an alliance capable of addressing credible security challenges for multiple years. It has been established upon the request of the European leaders by the British request, and specifically Ernest Bevin, the British Foreign Secretary, was the one that urged the United States to form such an alliance to deal with then known threats. That was communism in Europe, that was the Cold War, that was bringing the European and North American countries together in a common security cooperation. This organization has been very substantial. Only those organizations that actually are filled with credible substance gain the privilege to be called as an organization in the United States. And this organization has been very good when dealing with known threats, but as the international environment is changing, and especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, security aspects have multiplied, have been diversely dispersed across regions, areas, those that we know, but also some of those that we don't know yet. So today our task is to ask, is NATO politically and militarily capable and strong enough to deal with known knowns, known unknowns, and known unknown unknowns, and what are those coming challenges for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Today we have a list of very good speakers. One of them is Julian Lindley-French, who is a distinguished visiting research fellow at the National Defense University in Washington. I also have to add that he is the author of the book, The New Geopolitics of Terror, Demons and Dragons. The book is was issued in 2017 and is reasonably priced and available for everyone. And I think the title of this book is very well telling, that the old geopolitics and power contest is also mixed with intangible challenges, demons and dragons, technology, artificial intelligence, challenges stemming from the cyber domain, and the others. We also have Jānis Karlsbergs, who is Deputy State Secretary of the Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Latvia. Martin Swarovski, who is Head of Security Strategies Program at the European Values Center for Security Policy. And among the speakers, we also have the NATO representative from Public Diplomacy Division, Eric Powell. I will emphasize the rules of the discussion since we have to comply with all the necessities of the online requirements. I'll give the word to each of the speakers separately. The first one is going to be Julian Lindley-French. Then I'll pass the word to Jānis Karlsbergs. Then I will pass the word to Martin Swarovski, and then to the Eric Powell. But probably as the introduction, was opened by NATO Public Diplomacy Division representative, I wanted to ask if it would be okay for Eric Powell to go first. We would go then with the other speakers, because since this panel is addressing NATO challenges, I would like to start from the other way around. After Eric Powell, if he accepts my offer, I will introduce another speaker. Thank you very much, Eric. So I will not hesitate. I'll give the floor to you for 5-7 minutes, which is the time limit for every single speaker. Then each of you will have the possibility to comment or ask questions to each other. After that, we will open for the broader public. So Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandis, for this kind introduction and for this great opportunity to kick off. The panel is very much about NATO and its future challenges. So I'll focus on the new security threats. Of course, in order to remain strong, credible, and relevant, even after 71 years of existence, NATO's core characteristic has been its ability to adapt and to adjust to new and very different security environments and challenges. Because the core function of NATO remains the same: to defend and secure the citizens and territories of its member states against any external threat. Since 2014, we have seen a number of game-changing developments affecting our security. Russia has illegally annexed Crimea, increased its military presence on our borders, attempting to assassinate political opponents. We've seen a new level of brutality from ISIS and other terrorist groups. China has been asserting its economic, diplomatic, and military weight. We are seeing the development of new destructive technologies which affect our security. We have experienced new levels of hybrid warfare, sophisticated cyber attacks, and information warfare aimed to undermine our democracies and intervene in our elections. Furthermore, going back to the fundamental Article 3 in NATO's founding treaty of 1949, there is a growing and renewed realization how important it is that our own member states do all the necessary things to ensure that their societies are sufficiently resilient to resist and counter any crisis or threat. As the Secretary General said recently at the GlobeSec conference, our military cannot be strong if our societies are weak. And we now have seen how a pandemic, and even in the longer term, climate change, can affect our security as a threat multiplier. So what is clear is that we need to expect the unexpected. We must be prepared, and we must continue to adapt. Few words on the NATO 2030 project. In view of all these changes, last December, NATO leaders asked the Secretary General to start a reflection process to consider where we see our alliance 10 years from now and how it will continue to keep us safe in a more uncertain world. COVID-19 has changed our lives in ways we could barely have anticipated, and it has magnified existing trends and tensions when it comes to our security. Russia continues its military activities unabated. ISIL and other terrorist groups are emboldened, and both state and non-state actors promote disinformation and propaganda. China is heating up the race for economic and technological supremacy, investing in new military capabilities and increasing the competition over our values and way of life. NATO 2030 is about keeping our alliance strong militarily, making it stronger politically and more global. Staying strong militarily means continuing to invest in our armed forces and modern military capabilities and meeting the 2% defense investment pledge. Strengthening NATO politically means using NATO as the forum to discuss and act on issues affecting our shared security. Making NATO a more global alliance means working even more closely with partners, countries and organizations alike, to defend the rules-based international order and our core values in a world of increased competition. The Secretary General has asked a distinguished group of experts to provide new ideas. We are also reaching out to civil society, the private sector, and as we have seen last Monday, young leaders worldwide. As the SecGen recently said, the time has come to develop a new strategic concept for NATO, a new blueprint for how NATO can adapt and respond to a changing security environment. At next year's NATO summit meeting, based on the results of this reflection process and NATO 2030, the NATO leaders will decide on the way forward for the alliance. Now, a few words on the NATO EU cooperation, which of course is also a very important and growing relationship. We work together in areas including military mobility, maritime security, countering hybrid threats, COVID-19, and responding to the refugee and migrant crisis. We welcome the EU's efforts on defense. They have the potential to increase defense spending, provide new capabilities, and improve burden sharing within the alliance. But NATO and the EU need to complement each other. Nations shouldn't have two sets of capability requirements. Forces and capabilities developed under PESCO must also be available to NATO. We need the fullest possible involvement of non-EU NATO allies. Therefore, we welcome the inclusion of non-EU allies in projects under the European Defence Industrial Development Programme and under a new German proposal in the future in the European Defence Fund. This will hopefully be an incentive for non-EU allies' participation in PESCO projects. This is even more important after Brexit. Today, only 20% of NATO defense spending comes from EU allies. People living in non-EU countries account for more than half the population of NATO, and non-EU allies account for nearly 2/3 of our country's GDP. The EU cannot defend Europe alone, and European unity cannot replace transatlantic unity. NATO must protect 100% of our countries and population, so the role of our alliance remains irreplaceable. On hybrid warfare. Due to the digital revolution, the cyber world and social media, we now have to confront adversaries who meddle in democratic elections, manipulate information, spread fake news, and attack our infrastructure. Hybrid strategies are particularly aimed at complicating decision-making processes. For NATO to act, 30 allies must agree. This requires clarity about the threat. If this clarity is missing, NATO runs the risk of acting either too late or not at all. Hybrid campaigns are not magic. They can be detected, deterred, and defeated. Our counter-hybrid strategy, which we agreed in 2015, has laid the basis for a comprehensive response. The strategy divides our approach into 3 phases: prepare, deter, and defend. Prepare. The first and foremost objective in preparing to counter hybrid warfare is to better understand the phenomenon of hybrid war itself. Deter. From an alliance perspective, strong political will and allied solidarity, including visible military deterrence, may prevent a hybrid campaign and prevent it evolving into military conflict. Conventional and nuclear capabilities will remain at the heart of NATO's deterrence and defense posture. Special operation forces will also be in high demand in hybrid scenarios. Defend. Allies have been very clear that a hybrid attack has the potential to trigger Article 5, our collective defense clause. Yes, hybrid warfare is a difficult challenge for a classical political military alliance with 30 democracies around the table. But we are facing this challenge. We've made a lot of progress since 2014, when the particular hybrid threat from Russia became apparent to our nations. we have a much deeper understanding of the challenge. We have created new tools, and we have strengthened links with other organizations, especially the European Union. Now, a few words on China. NATO does not see China as the new enemy or adversary, but what we see is that the rise of China is fundamentally shifting the global balance of power. And NATO leaders agreed at the summit last year that the alliance needs to address the security consequences of China's rise, its opportunities and challenges. China has the second largest defense budget in the world and is investing heavily in new capabilities, including missiles that can reach NATO allies. China is also coming closer to us in cyberspace, in the Arctic, and in Africa. We also see China investing in our critical infrastructure and gathering vast amounts of global data. It is clear that China does not share our values: democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. We see this in Hong Kong, where the new security law undermines its autonomy and the liberty of its citizens, with the imprisonment of tens of thousands of Uyghurs in so-called re-education camps, with the use of artificial intelligence and facial recognition to monitor and control Chinese citizens, and censorship of the internet. And in May, we saw it when China imposed economic sanctions on Australia, after it led calls for an independent inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. There is a clear pattern of authoritarian behavior at home and increased assertiveness and bullying abroad. We will have to take this into account when considering our future approach to a rising China. So we are looking at what the rising size and scope of China's influence means for our security, not only for our shared security, but also for the common values we cherish for freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. The best way to do this is by Europe and North America working together, because we represent half of the world's economic might and half of the world's military might. We are stronger when we speak together on a global stage. On new technologies, the rapid pace of technological change is a challenge. Artificial intelligence, autonomous weapon systems, big data, quantum computing, and biotech can significantly change our lives, including for the better. NATO is keeping its technological edge. We are investing in key capabilities such as precision-guided munitions, strategic airlift, and surveillance aircraft. For example, we recently saw the delivery of the first 5 NATO alliance ground surveillance aircraft to their base in Sicily, Italy. And in the cyber domain, we are also strengthening our defenses. This includes NATO's Cyberspace Operations Center in Mons, Belgium. At NATO headquarters, we recently created a new innovation unit within the international staff to track all developments in this rapidly changing area and to help in developing new policies. But these developments also present risks, and we must remain at the forefront of these changes to understand what they mean for us. China, for example, intends on becoming the world's leading power in artificial intelligence by 2030. So we must research, invest in, and adopt emerging technologies, because our defense depends on maintaining our technological edge. NATO plays a key role. We coordinate defense planning among allies, ensuring we are developing the best technologies. NATO can serve as a forum for allies to consider practical, ethical, and legal questions that arise from new technologies. So NATO will continue to innovate and to ensure that our skills and equipment are second to none. Finally, concluding, the last strategic concept of 2010 mentioned 3 core functions: collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. No doubt the reflection process and NATO 2030 will mention the old, but especially the new challenges that NATO will have to address in the upcoming decade, up to 2030 and beyond. As NATO has to deal now with a whole range of old and new civil military threats and challenges, this means the need to cooperate with the civilian sector in our nations and with institutions like the European Union is growing. COVID-19 has changed our lives in many ways and magnified existing trends when it comes to our security. NATO 2030 is also about how we adapt to this new normal. Security is the foundation for our prosperity, and we must make it the foundation for our recovery. We have to adapt NATO once again, because the challenges that we face over the next decade are greater than any of us can tackle alone. That is why I'm convinced that the alliance still has an indispensable role to play in 2030 and will remain as relevant as ever. Thank you very much.
Paul from NATO Public Diplomacy Division for setting a stage for this conversation. I see that Julian Lindley-French also has joined our conversation. Hello, Julian. I just want to remind the introduction that I gave to you. I know you are wearing multiple hats, but you were introduced as Distinguished Visiting Research Fellow at National Defense University in Washington. But I added personally one more important aspect, that you are the author of The New Geopolitics of Terror, Demons and Dragons. And I think the title of the book pretty much says, you know, about the new reality, new normal or new security environment. And Eric Powell already mentioned, you know, the rising China, communist values, New World Order, demons deriving from Russia's revisionism and things alike. So I would like to give the floor to you next to set the stage and for your remarks. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you all, and sorry I'm not with you in Riga, and sorry for the slight technical hitches we had getting me here, virtually at least. So I heard the end of Eric's comments, and sorry not to hear all of them. What's great about this is that the topic is very much germane to my new Oxford book, which comes out in March, entitled Future War and the Defense of Europe, which of course will be brilliant and very reasonably priced. And I want to address the three questions you've posed. But my core message is blunt. There can be no nostalgia, no complacency. Things really are changing at a great pace. So the first question you posed, is NATO fit for new challenges? Well, let me start with an assertion that I made at NATO HQ a couple of weeks ago when I addressed the Committee for Standardization. The next decade will see the equivalent of 70 years of past military technological development crammed into 10. That is the nature and the pace of change taking place in the battle space. So yeah, Eric's right. NATO is sort of fit for some of these new challenges. But if the allies are complacent, particularly the European allies, we could soon not be. And that for me is the reason why we desperately need a new strategic concept that reaffirms the enduring purpose of the alliance and its fundamental tasks, but also recommits the alliance to adapt and transform given the fast changing nature of contemporary and future risks and threats. As I'll come to in a minute, believe we need to go far further. We need a NATO strategic integrated operating concept, which really drives far greater efficiency and effectiveness, given the economic pressures on our defense budgets, which our adversaries, or at least one of them, does not have. The second question you posed is thus, is NATO politically and militarily strong enough to cope with such unknowns? Well, I'm not sure we're sufficiently politically strong at the moment to cope with the knowns. So the unknowns, to echo Rumsfeld, we as yet have to grasp. What really concerns me is the coming COVID-19 economic crunch and the tendency of European governments in particular to see defense budgets as a kind of welfare fund to fund other parts of society. Now, you know, all power is relative. And the essential strength challenge for NATO, deterrence and defense, is an essential European challenge. You know, we are going to have to strike, we Europeans, in the midst of this COVID-19 economic crunch, a balance between cost, military capability, military capacity, technology, and the task list that is being generated. And one thing that concerns me for the last 20 years is the way in which the alliance has expanded the task list and also reduced the budgets. And that simply does not work over time. In time, that system, you can get away with that in a permissive environment, but you cannot get away with that in the kind of environment that we are in now, because what little increases in investment that some of us have made pale into insignificance compared with the likes of China and even Russia. They get far more military power purchasing parity for each ruble, each yuan invested than we do in Europe. The challenge is reinforced, to my mind, by the need to invest in what I call the European future force. You know, we're not going to have a situation in which the Americans face a single neat contingency. They'll face multiple scenarios the world over because that's the way the adversaries will engineer it. The worst case for Europeans is that we might have to defend Europe in the face of an opportunistic Russia on our own for a significant period. Now, that European future force must not only be compatible with the US future force, interoperable with the US future force, but it must also be able to operate across the multi-domains of future warfare: air, sea, land, cyber, space, information, and knowledge. And this can only be generated by a much deeper coordinated trans-European effort that includes the Brits, by the way. In fact, it needs the Brits to be involved in many ways, helping to lead this process if it is to be at all credible as a deterrer and a defender. Now, what I'm encouraged by are two recent documents. First is the alliance's concept for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. And the second is the 2019 military strategy. In fact, these are probably two of the most important Allied military documents since the Cold War. One could even go way back to the 1950s, because they are both designed to deliver an unambiguous, consistent, and continuous demonstration of alliance military power with a commitment to operational purposefulness, i.e., it communicates that this alliance has gripped the changing challenge and means what it's going to do to maintain defense and deterrence in that new environment. So in a sense, NATO is starting on the road to engineering that new force about which I have been talking, a force that must operate both at a far higher level of effect to be credible and to ensure that defense and deterrence remains credible, but also support frontline states in the fight against what I call 5D warfare: deception, disinformation, disruption, destabilization, and implied destruction as part of complex strategic coercion. Now, being effective at the high end and being effective across a broad swathe of security is a very profound challenge indeed. Now, the military strategy, and I think this is important, is entitled Comprehensive Defense Shared Response, and adopts a kind of whole of security approach that frames the development and employment of the alliance's military instrument of power. And what I find important is that implicit in all of this is a recognition that the alliance can only function if its first duty is to prepare itself as a war-fighting alliance. If the alliance can demonstrate that it can indeed fight a war, it deters such war. And by focusing on that, it is the most important statement of peace made by the alliance, I think, for a very long time, and should be thus central to the new strategic concept which is coming. The strategy itself has three key important elements. First, it recognizes the need for the alliance to confront again geostrategic competition, as well as the dangers of pervasive instability and the strategic shocks that they can trigger, particularly if they are engineered and manipulated. Second, the strategy identifies Russia and terrorist groups as the main strategic threats to the alliance and the Euro-Atlantic area, which is correct given their depth, breadth, duration, and complexity. And third, the strategy recognizes the need to move away from crisis response and both contest and counter these threats by developing a common capacity for competition. Now, what does that mean? That means that, for example, what the UK has done, develop an offensive cyber capability which has been used to send messages to certain actors that if you try to fry us, we can fry you back. That's all part of the new game in which we are now involved. So to conclude, I will address the third question you posed to all of us. Are NATO capabilities efficient and sufficient enough for the new challenges? Well, to my mind, we will certainly need to be far more efficient and far more effective. You know, I'm not one of those, as many will know, who believes in a European army, but I do believe in an army of Europeans. I do believe in a much more coordinated and cohesive European effort, the kind of effort that President Macron has suggested with his E2I initiative. And in effect, the concept for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, to my mind, acts as the bridge between the military strategy and what I believe the strategic concept should lead to, this NATO strategic integrated operating concept. Because that is about warfighting, a warfighting alliance in the 21st century in which NATO is credible across the mosaic of hyperwar, cyber war, and hyperwar. Now, a strategic concept will thus build on all this and indeed frame it and provide NATO with a coherent framework and approach by addressing the military deterrent, the minimum military deterrence activities the alliance will need across the peace, defense, war spectrum, and around 360 degrees of large-scale, long-term complexity with which we must grapple. And I want to make a fundamental point about this. What is important about the DDA was, for the first time in a long time, it was analysis, not cost-led. Now, if that can be maintained, if that analysis-led approach, that threat-led approach can be maintained and then funded, we will escape what for me has been the scourge of the alliance in the last 20 years, the tendency of Europeans, particularly Western Europeans, to recognize only as much threat as we can afford. So we are, I think, building the building blocks of this future alliance. We are beginning to understand the implications of China's rise for the United States and by extension for European defense and the alliance. And we are beginning, as Eric suggested, to properly grip the nature of the future battle space in which the likes of AI, big data, quantum computing, biotech, nanotech, even fintech will have a role to play. So in short, there is little point to my mind for another PR exercise if the strategic concept is going to be that. The strategic concept now must be the plan, and the plan will matter, both to convince ourselves that we are credible and to communicate to our adversaries that we mean what we say. Defense and deterrence of the Euro-Atlantic area will be maintained at whatever the cost and whatever is required. Thanks, Anders. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Julian Lindley-French, distinguished visiting research fellow at National Defense University in Washington, and the author of multiple very reasonable priced books. And I'm really looking forward to your latest book that is coming out in March. So as next one, Martin Swarovski, head of the Security Strategies program at the European Values Center for Security Policy. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the floor. The title of our panel sounds Adaptation and Transformation. It's obvious that there are there are many reasons for steady adaptation and transformation of the alliance, right? Some of the elements are connected with usage of high tech. Some of them are connected with growing importance of the gray zone warfare, growing interdependence of the different domains, including cyber and space domain. And certainly, we need to speed up our decision-making process at the very beginning of the conflict. I think this is the vulnerable part of the alliance, because some of the military measures of the alliance are still at the beginning of the conflict dependent on the political decisions. And this can be our, let's say, comparative disadvantages vis-a-vis competitors like China and Russia. As I said, there will be many elements or many, let's say, incentives for adaptation. I will touch upon one of them, and this is a necessity to deal with two near-peer adversaries at the same time. I think no matter whether we will call it great power competition, or we will have another name, we might a bit have a shift in the narrative taking into account the new US administration. Once is clear, all the analysis of the capabilities, strategies, and intention of the political leadership suggest that Russia and China will pose in next 10, 15 years a major threat for the alliance. And in my opinion, we need to acknowledge this fact, no matter whether we like, let's say, the terms, the terminology of the US administration or not. And I think in this regard, NATO needs to become a part of the strategic answer to this necessity to deal with near-peer adversaries. And for two main reasons, I would say. First, is if NATO is a part of the strategic answer to this problem, it will somehow serve its relevance for the United States, which is very important. And second, that to be able to cope with this great power competition serves also the own interests of the alliance, including the European part of the alliance, because Russia is nowadays kind of misusing this situation, knowing that the US forces and major ally forces are increasingly overstretched, and Russia is also surrounding NATO and European part of the NATO with relatively cheap naval capabilities in order, let's say, to overstretch the capacities of the West even more. So it is in our own interest. And state that, I think if we acknowledge this, it will necessary-wise have an implication on capabilities, force structure, but as well as strategy. I fully agree with my predecessor that we need to have a new strategic concept that will reflect this. And I think if NATO decides to go with this path, because I think it requires really political decision, right? It will be decided by politicians. It decides to go this path, being an answer, part of the strategic answer to this problem. I think we need to start to analyze the similarities of the Russian and Chinese military capabilities. If we analyze Russia and growing Chinese military might, we will come to the conclusion that there is one important similarity. And this is that due to still limitation of both armies, they apply, let's say, what we can call limited warfare, limited in as far as regional scope and time scope is concerned, because they cannot afford a longer conflict. And they both, using the advantage that I mentioned at the beginning, I mean that they do not need to bother too much about their own population resistance to conflict. They use in their strategy what we can call fait accompli strategy. There is a difference that in the longer term, China will have the ability to enhance its ability to project power, right? It has a money for increasing the ability to project power. But so far, China as well as Russia have very limited ability to project power. Therefore, they are focusing on limited warfare with fait accompli scenario. That means in the reality, they are focusing on the ability to start a conflict, cause a strategic shock to the adversary, to grab the territory, to apply this their A2AD capabilities, anti-access area denial, and what is important, then trying to negotiate with the adversary. So I think if we compare what they are training, what Chinese are training and what Russian are training, the similarities are there. Actually, what Russia trains, all these Zapad exercises, it's not its ability to start the conflict, it's their ability to finish the conflict according to their notes. And I think this is the same in case what China is training vis-a-vis Taiwan. So I'm saying this because of to underline that NATO future as an organization coping with great power competition is not detrimental to, let's say, resilience of the eastern flank. Other way around, it is interconnected. So increasing our resilience on the eastern flank vis-a-vis Russian strategy, it will first unbound hands of the United States to deal with a Chinese threat. And second, because there are similarities between the Chinese and Russian military capabilities, we can save some money investing in the, let's say, capabilities suited for both contingencies, the Russian threat and the Chinese threat, for the time being. As I said, for the time being. So I elaborated on this in my paper that I prepared for this conference, and it will be topic actually of the panel tomorrow, which has the title "Relevance of the United States on the both sides of the Atlantic." So I will not elaborate on more on details, but to sum up, I pointed out to, as I say, 4 main tasks if NATO wants to be a part of the strategic answer to this, let's say, great power competition or necessity to deal with China and Russia at the same time. Those 4 are first, that NATO needs to substantially boost its navy. It needs to boost its navy capabilities, including to have new maritime strategy. The last maritime strategy is from 2011, and we need to have a new maritime strategy to guide our capability development, as well as to face the reality, for instance, the new reality that Russia, through the Turkish Straits, is now building up its submarine presence on Eastern Mediterranean and so on and so forth. Second task, and I think it's in the line what Julian has said, second task, in my opinion, is enhance European level of ambition. And so there are different, let's say, suggestions how to do that. But I would like to point out to the fact that in the reality, the majority combat brigades of NATO combat brigades are European brigades. It's not the American brigades, it's European brigades. But the problem is that Europe lacks combat support and combat support service. That means that without US logistics, it is not able to sustain their forces in abroad. So to say it bluntly, without US logistics or life support and that kind of arrangements, both NATO missions in Afghanistan and Iraq would collapse. So I think that that Europe needs to invest here, let's say, to deployability of its forces and heavily invest in combat support and combat support service, and maybe as a guidance for NATO planners, it can be some, let's say, benchmarks or some goals that say that there should be a commitment of Europe to be able to conduct free major joint or let's say one major joint operation plus three small operations, free joint small operation without the US support, or the Europe ability to conduct one, provide half of combat power to one major joint plus operation without the US support. So I think this is important. And the third task that I indicated was the streamline the NATO defense planning process to technologies needed for near-peer opponents with fait accompli strategy. I mean, now what is needed, to say it short, is increase our, we need to have a ability of rapid penetration from high distance. We need to have long range, stealth, and unmanned capabilities. At the very beginning of the conflict, it is important because the adversary applying this fait accompli strategy counts on our, let's say, our lower ability to decide whether we will start fighting. Because as I said at the beginning, the political leadership of NATO will need to deal with public opinion, and if we have a capabilities that would lower that would start from the very beginning to disrupt A2AD capabilities of the adversary with lowest possible human casualties, the more, let's say, likelihood of our decision makers to do so, really. So as I said, rapid penetration from high distance, it should be our task. And United States already started to invest in those capabilities, probably Great Britain too. And what I'm saying is that the European economic wealth should add to this effort. And the fourth and the last one that I would like to mention here is, okay, so is bolster soft security, intelligence, hybrid capabilities, and harmonize also application of technological sanctions. Harmonization of technological sanctions, our ability to apply technological sanctions, for instance, in space domain or in the cyber domain, because there are still, let's say, limitations of Russia, for instance, in case of space capabilities. So these are, but as I said at the beginning, what we need is a political decision. So I'm very much in favor of having a new document defining defense and deterrence, because simply difference, last document from 2012 is simply outdated. And I think we need a strategic concept that will reflect maybe if there is a decision of the leaders, define something like proper division of role between the NATO and the United States, because it's clear that NATO states will not send their capabilities to Indo-Pacific region in some massive scale, but proper division of role, I think, is the answer to the problem.
Thank you very much, Martin Swarovski, Head of the Security Strategies Program at the European Values Center for Security Policy. Now I would like to give a floor to Deputy Secretary of State, Jānis Karlsbergs from the Latvian Defense Ministry, and also I want to congratulate him on the Victory Day of the Latvian military, which is today. Jānis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandis. It's good to see you, and it's really good to see all of you in digital Riga. So that's an unfortunate way. So from organizers of all this conference, it's really a pity from one side, but as COVID is giving us, big challenges, it, in my opinion, it gives great opportunities as well. We can see that we can fruitfully discuss issues in a different mode and digital mode. Again, I would so much appreciate to see you all in Riga, to have our excellent NATOs. But, this is a part of patience, of new strategic patience. We need to address all of those questions you were mentioning. So I would like as well to welcome young, or they can't see them in face, are they new or just young? But it's important part of the conference, and I in particular would like to welcome here as well. So it's kind of, for me, extremely difficult task. It's boring. I can't disagree with any point of you gentlemen were mentioning. It's awful. So I was considering in what way to what I would like to put and how we would look from different perspective with exactly the same and conclusions you are all mentioning in different ways and styles. So adaptation of NATO, again something is wrong. So basically whenever we speak about transformation, reforms, so it's constantly something is wrong everywhere where we touch upon. And so what are we really doing? Economic reforms, financial instruments, everything transforming. So what's wrong with NATO? And here I was just thinking, going to what is really a basement of all those things we are discussing here. And today with my colleagues, we were just thinking how better to frame. And so I came up today with three basic parts which are framing all what we are discussing, and which brings us as society, as a nation, and then as organization together. And the first is, I would say, part of resilience. And now I'm more speaking from national perspective. And resilience of individual person, of society, of institution, of our economy, and you could add more to this, but this would be one basket I would put, one leg. Another leg, which predominantly we are speaking today, but having this first element as well, part in your discussion, are capabilities or capacities, I would say. And those are not only military ones, those are civilian, multiple things which are within this second leg, I would say. And third leg, in this context we are discussing, would be international. Where we minus as friends, and it's a multipolar world where we have international organizations, and we all know a different kind of organizations. But here, speaking from very friendly part, those are NATO and of course European Union, where we both belong. So what's really wrong with all of this? And here we are, what of course close to Ministry of Defense, those simple things, military truths, capabilities. And it's quite sexy at the moment to put gray zone, asymmetric warfare, hybrid warfare, but nothing is new in this sphere. We only difference, we have a bit of new soft computing systems. Otherwise, name one of those things which are something old ones. Therefore, I would think that among those three legs I was putting, military legs are essential ones. And again, I would not repeat all of what you all were saying, what we all need to do. And here, Julian, I heard 5 Ds, nice, it's not 5 Gs, which are quite busy lately, but 5 Ds. I would propose, again, not my own formula, 3 Rs and 3 Cs. So 3 Rs, what we should do, definitely readiness, responsiveness, and reinforcement. And then we can analyze how sufficient it is. It's a different matter. And 3 Cs. Cash capabilities and commitments.
Jānis, you're lost somewhere with the internet. We definitely must invest in capabilities. While we are waiting the return of Jānis Karlsbergs, we have a couple of questions which are asking, actually questioning the European capability to maintain or enhance its own future force without the United States, without any duplication and overlap, considering Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer's remarks. And the author doesn't specify which ones or what kind of remarks. I'll just mention that last year in 2019, during the Riga conference, she said that Germany will brace to increase the defense spending to 2% in 15 years. That's the amount of the time the Baltic states are in NATO. And there's also a question about Julian Lindley-French's books. You know, it's like that's a very popular subject during this discussion. And in your book, you have cautioned that Russia is wishing to rebuild the buffer. Any developments since the publishing of the book on that side? And probably Julian could go first to answer these questions while we are waiting for Jānis to come back and mend the internet connection.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to lose Jānis because he was on fine form. Well, first, Russia is clearly trying to establish some kind of de facto buffer or influence, rather, over the over NATO and the EU's east, and we should not be under any illusions about that. That's part of great power competition. So we have to face up to that, assess it, and respond to it. As for European future forces and redundancy, frankly, there are often good reasons to have a certain level of redundancy, because that also builds strategic depth. My own sense is that if, given the growing pressures on the US forces, military overstretch will be a major factor for the United States. Therefore, it's fundamentally important that Europeans grasp that reality and recognize a fundamental reality, which is the only way by 2030 the United States will be able to guarantee Europe's defense is if Europeans ourselves do far more for our own defense. That is the essential center of gravity of the new transatlantic contract upon which NATO must depend. So to my mind, it is time our leaders woke up to these uncomfortable realities, whatever the cost may be, because their first duty is to defend our citizens. The alliance is the most efficient mechanism for doing that, but it will require an awful lot more European investment, political and actual, to realize such a goal.
Necessity to enhance the European solidarity, to invest credible amounts and shift also our capabilities to address novel security challenges. And I just want to pass a question to Martin and also Eric. Maybe you could both of you shortly outline a couple of challenges that could bring Europeans and Americans together in closer alliance than it is at the moment. We are approaching the end of this discussion, so I kindly ask to keep our comments short. So first one, I will give the floor to Eric.
Yeah, thanks. Well, that, of course, is a big question. I mean, I totally agree with what Julian said about, in the end, it's a matter of political will by our leaders, whether they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. And that, of course, in these COVID times, I think Julian also mentioned it. Yes, we are facing an economic crunch with COVID and pressure on all budgets. And then, of course, our leaders tend to prioritize health and education and social programs more than defense. But indeed, we'll have to see, of course, what the impact is of the election of Joe Biden as the new US president. That, of course, helps in persuading Europeans to really spend more as part of a bargain with the US. Yes, we have to realize we face totally new and different challenges, also much further away from home. I think this is why I think that the Secretary General stressed the third point in his NATO 2030 vision, which is a more global alliance. We've heard that Joe Biden is planning to hold a big summit early in his term for sort of to strengthen the alliance of democracies. And I think that's an interesting new thing. And I think for us, we also realize that probably in this more global world with more global challenges, again, the rise of China here, really plays into our minds is we need to strengthen our cooperation with like-minded democracies in the Asia-Pacific region. Absolutely, that's fundamental. We already have very good close cooperation with countries like Australia, Japan, South Korea, but probably we'll have to beef it up because we realize that also the threats and challenges in the Asia-Pacific, although it's far away from our own shores, it will also affect us directly. And that's a sense that has to come back in the minds of our European political leaders as well, that we just can't say sort of, we leave the Asia-Pacific to the US and we will only focus on Europe. I think we have to realize these are global challenges. We're in a global world with technology. We also have a responsibility to do our utmost in managing the security threats and challenges, even far away from home.
Thank you very much, Eric Powell from NATO Public Diplomacy Division. And I would like to pause this question even further. The election of Joe Biden, the summit to enhance the transatlantic security, adapt NATO and European states for new challenges in Asia Pacific, South China Sea. What do you think is like the present NATO, like the present American leadership, democratic incumbent, and decisions in Europe to spend more? Would this actually be credible decision in the Europeans, since we have always been rather complacent about our military spending? It was Donald Trump that actually urged Europeans to spend more, and these kind of like calls by the United States were very welcome by the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. So I will give the floor to Martin Swarovski first to address this question. Please keep it short, 1-2 minutes. We are approaching the end of our discussion, and then finally I will allow to conclude Jānis Karlsbergs on the same matter.
Thank you. First, maybe I would like to underline once more, when I spoke about the enhance of European level of ambition, I mean strictly enhance European level of ambition within NATO, This is no about European strategic autonomy. I'm skeptical about European strategic autonomy. I very much welcome the clear expression of the German defense minister, AKK, recently, that said the illusion of strategic autonomy must end. So I refer to European level of ambition within NATO. And second, to a question, I think there is a more general problem between the United States and Europe, regardless what kind of administration will be in the White House. And I named the problem the growing doctrinal gap between the United States and major European states. If you see US doctrine, United States substantially changed its doctrine after 2014, reflected in the national security strategy, national defense strategy, nuclear posture review, and it is now completely different doctrine than on the other side of the Atlantic. I mean, a decisive European state, France, whose doctrine is still directed on the terrorism, mainly the Africa, stemming from Africa. German doctrine that is focused on keeping status quo of the international system, and the British doctrine that was now rather focused on, let's say, some capability changes, renewal of this nuclear threat, and so on and so forth. And I think without this addressing this problem, that doctrines are substantially different, US doctrines bluntly saying that engagement is over because it did not bring anything, that you need to approach adversary from the position of strength, that you also see military not just as a force to destroy, but also promote your interests. I'm saying that these, if this growing doctrinal gap will not be addressed, we will face again some, let's say, US European friction. We saw it in case of Iran, and I think we will see it again unless we will address the issue. And this is regardless whether in the United States as Trump or Biden, because Biden in the nearest future will not substantially change the prevailing US doctrine. So I think this is to your question. We need to go to the substance, not to personalities.
So triple containment: Iran, dragons in China, and demons in Russia. Not in the short term, but in the middle term, would Joe Biden's leadership enhance the European decisions to improve their capabilities, shift the capabilities to address those challenges? I would like to give the floor to Jānis Karlsbergs. After improving the internet capabilities, he is back, Deputy State Secretary of the Defense Ministry of the Republic of Latvia. Last comment, please keep it short because we are about to conclude this discussion.
I'm so sorry, as technologies in this respect, most probably internet connection failed. There are so many users apparently, which are not only maybe ours ones. So sorry for this. Therefore, I really will sum up in this respect, not repeating what was said. I do think dilemma, a part of clearly we should invest, and the most important dilemma I will not touch too much in American elections. I very much hope that pressure for Europeans, as there were indicative measures, 80% of European Union states of defense budget are out of European Union, and we should invest. And here is really a question of political will. Another element is I was trying to, and I was stopped in between to compare Goliath and David when fighting. And here you see that it could be in reverse order. And Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, I do think, as well underlines this problem. So first, we definitely should build on those military legs again. There was a moment when we were considering tanks are obsolete. Again, I know that there are people who are considering this again shows that they are obsolete, but it's again totally wrong. The question is of balancing right now. And this is really part of extremely complex world. And how is limited resources to spend on appropriate things. Without the basics, we are not able to deliver anyway. So therefore, if we are going too much in artificial intelligence, which is a part, should be done, cyberspace, space, those issues are already new domains of NATO, and we need to invest in them. But at the same time, it would be not complacency not to do in a basic things, the basic logic, and including passive defense elements. So therefore, it's really challenging world ahead of us. I hope we have time for this, but I very much hope that the pressure, sometimes we, unfortunately, Europeans are lacking it. Pressure across ocean will keep pushing on us. From Latvian perspective, I can only say that COVID case was our government approved, and I hope in a few days our parliament will approve a budget for 21, which will be well above 2% of GDP in order to substitute GDP loss as well. So we are trying to keep our pace as we were planning, but I know how difficult it is when all society parts are struggling. Therefore, comprehensive defense is another element we should again pay in this complex world part of our efforts. Sandis, I will stop. I missed my minutes due to connection, so sorry for that.
Thank you very much for interesting thoughts and Goliath and small states, big states idea. Nagorno-Karabakh probably is also serving as a little lesson to Abkhazia and South Ossetia, the Russian partners or breakaway regions from Russia. I want to thank all the speakers for this interesting discussion. Julian Lindley-French, distinguished visiting research fellow at the National Defense University in Washington. Jānis Karlsbergs, Deputy Secretary of State, Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Latvia. Martin Swarovski, Head of the Security Strategies Program at the European Values Center for Security Policy, and Eric Powell from NATO Public Diplomacy Division. Thank you very much, you all. It was enjoyable, interesting discussion that brought up interesting topics, food for thought for the future to consider when we are thinking and also planning our defense policies for the Euro-Atlantic community. Thank you very much. I'll conclude here.